Good morning. In this video, I want to show you quickly what Ruckman was teaching on slavery, and that it was a racial issue. These guys are conning you, telling you that it's not racial. But when you look at the verses that Paul's talking about and how these guys interpret it, they're interpreting it racially. Paul's talking about slavery in general. There are no racial connotations what Paul's talking about. That's why they always jump to the Civil War, people. That's why they always jump to the Civil War, because it becomes racial. And you can be conned all you want by these guys. They don't believe this, they don't believe that, but they do believe it. Because if they were back in the 1800s, this is exactly what they'd be teaching. 1 Corinthians, this is the commentary from Ruckman. The second illustration Paul uses, verses 20 to 24, is slavery. Verse 21. If one was a slave, he was not to worry about it. Instead, he was to use his condition to serve God. Some folks have the most terrible time with this verse, but is explained in verse 22. Now, Paul is talking about slavery. The context tells you that. You don't have to go into the Greek. Slave masters. It's certainly in this context means the slave, because slavery existed throughout Rome, and for practical, but it was never racial. It had nothing to do with the equality of any individual. Had nothing to do with one person not being equal to another. It just had their status was different. Their status was different. Not their equality, God-given rights before God, because of their race. I heard a fellow say, well, if your servitude is not to be the servants of men, then you ought to get free. No, that won't work. He is saying that a man in his court of the Lord while he is a slave is to treat the service given to his master as a man as given to the Lord. Salvation makes him a free man on the inside, even though he's a slave on the outside, which is what Uncle Tom's Cabin was about. That's what Uncle Tom. He was basically a Christian, and that's why no matter what abuse he took from the outside, he was from the mean slave owner. He was serving that owner as a Christian, and I was unto the Lord. That's what Uncle Tom's Cabin is about. He was a hero in the Christian faith. He was applying the Christian doctrine to that. So they all make him a villain, but he wasn't. Paul brings this section to a conclusion in verse 24. So let's lay this thing out. When a Christian gets saved, he is bought with a price. When he is saved, he's God's servant and God's slave. Now, see, now he's like they use both words. See, you have to bring both words. Which is it? You're supposed to be using interchangeably. You're not supposed to be using both words. God's servant and God's slave. This is the nonsense you get from these guys. This is how they think. All right, if he is God's servant and God's slave, he is no longer a servant of any man. So which is it? Is a servant or a slave? He is the servant of God. Or you mean he's a slave of God? Or is he a servant? His servant serves freely. You can be a servant without being a slave. Therefore, if the man that God saves happens to be a slave or a servant to a man, so you can be a servant to a man without being a slave. He is not to worry about it because he is free. He is the Lord's freeman. So he says, if you are a slave of a man and his servant, see, I keep putting both words in there. You keep using why? Because King James doesn't have slave, it has servant. And you find yourself getting saved, don't worry about it. Use your servitude as a testimony and a witness for the Lord, because you are not really a slave, you're a free man. Okay? To the Lord, that's right, you're a free man. Because now you're doing things willingly as unto the Lord. You are bought with a price. That is how the thing goes. Now, who makes the jump here to the Civil War, people? This has nothing to do with the Civil War. This has nothing to do with the Civil War in Scripture. But they make a jump to the Civil War. Here we go. Here we go, people. I hate to start the Civil War again. But there was nothing in the New Testament that does away with slavery. See that, people? These are the same clowns who are going to tell you, I'm against slavery, I wouldn't want a slave, I wouldn't own a slave, but there's nothing in the New Testament that does away with slavery. It is not there. The Civil War started to get rid of states' rights. Oh yeah. Who's that sound like, huh? The Civil War was to prove that all states had to be controlled by the socialistic government in one place, and the slavery was the issue they picked on. They picked. In the 1960s, they picked school busing. He's going to go to the 60s. What issue are we dealing with here, people? Now a racial issue. They shifted. They're not talking about slavery in general. In the Roman Empire, people of all races were enslaved. Nothing to do with your race. Now we're dealing with one race. Now we're dealing with one race, people. So when you hear these guys yapping about slavery and how we're not teaching it correctly, and we're making an issue about the Confederacy and stuff, these are the guys who jumped the Confederacy because they're making an issue out of one race being enslaved. Now, Paul's not talking about employee-employee relationship. He's addressing slaves who have human masters. He's talking about here 1 Timothy 6:1 and 2. After salvation, a slave was to stay and work for his master, not get free and run away, especially if the master was saved. A preacher is to teach and exhort these things. That's what they were doing in the South. Don't run away. But it's okay for Patrick to run away. Now, Patrick might have been saved. He might have been, I think he got saved when he actually got back to Scotland. I'm not sure. That would be their excuse. But the point is, people escape from slavery all the time. In fact, in the Old Testament, an escaped slave was supposed to be protected by the Jews because they would come there and they were not supposed to return the slave. So the fact that slaves would escape was legitimate in the sense that the Jews protected them if they got to Israel. If he does not, he is proud, knowing nothing. Verse 4. This is the whole business about New Testament teaching, that all men, this whole business about the New Testament teaching that all men are equal and that all slaves should be set free is a heresy. You understand that? You see what these guys are teaching? They jump from the idea of slavery in general as a practical understanding of how to deal with it. Because you weren't going to escape from slavery in the Roman Empire. Now he's telling you, even if your slave owner freed you, you weren't supposed to get free. This whole business about the New Testament teaching that all men are equal and that all slaves should be set free is heresy. Is a heresy. You see where these guys are coming from? They reject the Declaration of Independence. And they're not dealing with slavery in general, people. They're dealing with a particular race in slavery. In New Testament, a saved servant is told to stay in his place. He doesn't cross the Ohio River on the ice or anything else. He's talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin, I believe, there. A saved slave at the plantation in Alabama and Georgia back in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s who was knocked down on the block and sold for a price of money and had his family split up and later raised his own family down there in the little old shack on the river was freer than Cassius Clay. It is too late now to start another war. There was nothing worth fighting for anymore except the Lord. But if those colored folks didn't get themselves in the worst trouble by letting those white folks mislead them. Get that? Still want slavery. That's what Blake is teaching you, people. Where do you think he got it from? This is his pastor, he claims. I don't know what I'm talking about. Those Yankees said, we'll set you free, boys. We'll set you free. You set them free. Now, where are they? They're in Detroit, Philadelphia, Cleveland, eating dog food. That's where they are. See, they'd be better off on the plantations, people. They're killing each other. That's what they're doing. They make up 80% of the prison population. Now, just think about this. Get broad-minded for a minute, brethren. When this bird was picked up, he was in the bushes wearing a loincloth. Now he goes on talking about where he was. He's from Africa. This is what they were saying in the South, people. Then he was picked up and brought to the States. He was brought down south and put up in a big open place. 3 meals a day were provided. 3 meals a day provided. During the time he didn't work, he hunted and fished. He hunted possum and had possum gravy and ate watermelons and sat around and sang. On Sunday, he was required to be at the white master's church and went up, required people. There you go. Went up into the balcony and heard the plan of salvation, and he got born again. Now, remember what Breaker told you, that in the 1840s and 50s, what were these pastors, these Baptist pastors teaching? That blacks had no souls. Now, he just said 1840s, 40s, 50s. Breaker said there were many, many, many Baptists who were teaching that the black people didn't have souls. Oh, they're just sitting around all day, lava-gallying, eating watermelons, and having a good old time, eating that possum. Now, that might be terrible, but did you know that worse things can happen to you in life than that? Yeah. Yeah. See that? Slavery ain't too bad, people, if you're the right race. It's not racial, huh? He jumps them. They're reading into something. Paul has nothing to say with race, but they jump right to the Civil War, people. And you wonder why I go after these guys? Because when Breaker's talking to you about the Civil War, that's what he's saying. That there's a race that's not created equal, and that deserves to be enslaved, and it's better for them to be enslaved. And where they get that from? They get that from Genesis 9. We got to get rid, according to Ruckman, you got to get rid of the myth that all men are created equal. Paul didn't say that. Paul didn't say that. That's not an issue in slavery. That's not an issue in slavery. Slavery has to do with circumstances. That's a status in your life. Because you are put under slavery doesn't mean you're not equal to the individual who put you under slavery. But in the end, towards the end, they had to teach people, black people, in those churches. And what did Breaker say? They wouldn't even preach them the plan of salvation. Because he said they didn't have souls. But you see why the Civil War comes up. Because they don't want to deal, when they deal with these verses, they're not thinking slavery in general. Which can come to any man, of any color, any race. You can put in slavery. They're thinking of one particular race, at one particular time. And according to Robert Breaker, that was the true biblical society. And you weren't supposed to tell those slaves, those black slaves, Negro slaves, that they could be free. That was upsetting to biblical society. But if you say, it's the same thing Huffman said, if you say all men were created equal, that's a heresy. I'm sorry, people, that's what they teach. And what do they say? What's the verse say? Does the verse say anything about race in that? What are they reading into it? Paul is talking about master race relations. They read into the Civil War issue. They jump right to the Civil War. They make an issue of the Civil War. They make an issue of the black. And that's what they used to justify their slavery. And that's why they rejected the Declaration of Independence. Based on those verses. And applying those verses to their situation. And then saying, oh, it doesn't teach all men are created equal. Well, slavery had nothing to do with all men being created equal. It had to do with the idea they were just put under slavery. Or born into slavery. And Paul's just saying, don't worry about it. God will take care of you. Like the situation with Joseph. No matter what situation you're in, God will He knows you, you're saved. God will take care of you. Don't fret about it. But that didn't that didn't change the fact that you're still created equal with all men. But they just said that any man, but they made the slave inferior to the master. Ruckman just made the slave inferior to the master. And who's he talking about? He's talking about one race. So I'll stop, put this up. Amen. Thank you.